All right, hello ADS. Welcome to your last session of the day. We are aware that we stand between you and happy hour, but we're gonna make this the best damn hour of your day. First, I wanna hear a little something from the room. Who is joining us from the East Coast? What about the West Coast? Any of my fellow Midwesterners in here? Always nice and loud, but very polite. And what about from the South? Who we got from the South? Not enough, but all right. All right, so we're here to talk about coalitions. Raise your hand if in the last 2 days you've heard someone use the term coalitions. Raise your hand again if it's often this sort of nebulous term that people act like it's a box you have to check, but they don't tell you how to do it and the value of it all the time. Oh, I see the same hands, great. Well, what we have here are the all-stars of coalitions. People who have done this work, people who do this work, and people who know what works, what doesn't, and what you all need to take back with you to your communities. So with that in mind, I'm gonna start with the why. We're gonna start there and then we're gonna bring it back down to the nuts and bolts because the why is obvious, but we're gonna start there and then we're gonna get into the work. So for each of my panelists, you are the all-stars of organizing. You are brilliant organizers in your own right. We could give you a ton of money and we could get you to get something done. I have all the faith in the world you could hire the staff. But still, you all choose to work in coalition. You work in partnership with other groups. You bring people together as a collective to get things done. And I wanna know why you choose that over just going it alone and doing it yourself. We'll start with Sean, we'll do around the table.
So I come from the Bay Area, a place that's built on coalitions, right? Every movement that has come out of the Bay Area does not come out of just one single community. It comes out of communities working together to ensure that we have a broad base of support, that we have broad voices, that we are reflective of the communities that are being impacted by those changes.
Awesome. I come from Portland, Oregon, which, if you did not know, is the widest city in the entire United States. And I think the reason that my organization, the Coalition of Communities of Color, was originally formed over 20 years ago is a great glimpse into this question. So 20 years ago in Portland, communities of color were being pitted against each other, as you still see happening around the country today. And so the reason that we were formed was because we saw that this harm was affecting different communities of color, and we understood that we would have greater impact if we were able to recognize the intersections across communities of color and not only focus on one community, but instead think about the larger vision of what equity meant for all communities of color. And so the reason that we do this work together is because we want to ensure that the voices of all of those communities are truly being taken into consideration in coalition work.
Love that. Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm from the other Portland, actually, Portland, Maine. 2 Portlands up here. Shout out East Coast. I love this question too for myself because I wonder why I do coalition building. I said this earlier, like I also am like, why am I not on a yacht or something? Like why am I like actually really working in these spaces? But I think you just have a call for this type of community building, and I think especially for me as somebody that was and is a community activist in Portland and now a member of the Portland City Council and the second Black woman that's ever been elected, coalition building is actually something that has existed before me, and the reason I'm able to be a Black woman on City Council is because of the coalition building and the community building that Black women did prior to my existence. So I'm awarded these privileges because of the coalitions that existed before me. So I do take that very seriously to continue moving forward in that way of building that community and of realizing that all of us, especially young people, especially people of color, have so much collective power, and if we can harness it in the right direction, there is so much that we can do. So it's really important for me.
I'm Ed Shoemaker, I'm from Boston, and to me, coalition building just seems the only way to do it if you really want to have lasting, meaningful change. And being able to harness and leverage the collective impact of a wide range of groups is always going to be the best way to get that done.
Well, I don't care who you are, and I don't care how much money you have. You can't do it alone. It's very lonely trying to do it alone, so you have to have colleagues. But, you know, I'm from New York City. It's an amazingly diverse place. If we are going to improve our democracy, if we are going to provide tools to the voters that they will actually use, then nothing is imposed on any community. Everybody has to be at the table. Everybody has to have their word in the decision making, and everybody has to take the tool out to their community if it's going to be effective. And that's coalition.
Yes, to all of that. Retweets all around. So again, this is my all-star team, right? These are my starting 5. We go into the championship, and now it's time to flex. We're going to talk about why each of you are here. Each of you have built or are building a coalition that has changed your community, right? Have built something, and I want you to talk about the experience, whichever one you want to pick from. Some of you have a bunch, some of you are working on something very specific right now, but I want to hear a little bit about those experiences and some of the lessons you learned along the way before we really dig in. So Sean, we're going to start with Susan. We're going to come back towards me.
So, yeah, I'm a coalition builder. I truly, truly believe in it. And we built Rank the Vote NYC to pass ranked choice voting in New York City, and I'm a founding member of Let New York Vote, dragging New York's elections into the 21st century. And it just was really, really clear that, as I said, you cannot do it alone. There are so many different viewpoints, there's so many different voices, and it's a representative democracy. So some of our representatives are going to listen to this set of voices, other representatives are going to listen to another set of voices. And it is immensely satisfying to stand together and to know that you are invigorating the democracy and that you're bringing tools to the communities that the communities will be able to use. And coalition building is about collaboration and not about payoffs. And frankly, it's emotionally satisfying as well as politically powerful. And that's why, you know, I've been doing it for years. And I love it. I love being in a room with a lot of different people working on a problem together.
So in the city of Boston, it's a pretty unique political environment. And I don't think you'd be able to get anything done without a coalition. But doing it, you have to really be intentional in the way that you lead and create space for as many people to join and partake and to contribute to the coalition that you're building. And I think that that's what's made it so successful in Boston, and that's what we're going to continue to do. Just realizing that you got to have a big tent and be creative in ways that you can meet people where they're at and engage them in ways that it makes it easy for them to contribute. Yeah, that's the best way I could say it.
Yeah, I think coalition building for me in terms of running for office was really interesting because I have never been in public office before. I didn't grow up in politics, and I ran against somebody who very much was part of the political establishment. And so with that, I think, well, nobody thought I was going to win. Like, everyone thought I was going to get swept. And I think it was really important for me to organize younger people, to organize people of color, and to organize people from my community to get them excited about local government again. Which is really hard because local government is like sidewalks and like street lights, and nobody's really excited to come to the meetings. But I think it's really important, again, to make sure that people know, especially the constituents, the voters, how much power they actually have. When you come to public comment, it's your right to actually have time to tell us what you need, and we're representatives of you. So essentially, if we want to keep staying in office, we need to make sure that we are hearing from a wide range of different constituents. And I think being able to turn out first-time voters, people who are really disenfranchised from voting, people who are apathetic about voting, and getting them to care about local politics and making sure that they knew that their voice was really important. And not only that, but that they would have someone in office that was them, that would listen to them and that understood them, that wasn't a career politician, that was just a regular person, that was a black woman and a renter that just wanted to make their city better. I think that really inspired a lot of communities to come out and vote like never before. Based on that, I got 63% of the vote, which is unheard of in this election. And thank you. It was. Felt great. So I think in that conversation of getting people to the polls to actually care about local government and still stay engaged beyond the election has really benefited the city of Portland, because now we're looking at a new generation of leadership. And a lot of that also is through ranked choice voting. We have the most racially diverse council we've ever had. Our council is women-led at this point. So a lot of that, I think, is, again, getting people engaged, especially younger people, of saying, you have a vote, that vote matters. And not only that, but you have a voice. Come to the meetings, tell us what's going on, and work with us to figure out how we can help make the city that we all live in better so that we can all stay there, work there, and thrive.
So the effort that I am talking about today in the other Portland is specifically about charter reform. So the charter is the local city constitution that affects how the form of government, how the form of elections are set up. And so I really like to start off by talking about the community engagement process that went into this effort. This did not start out as a fleshed out policy in a specific ballot measure campaign. So my role was not necessarily entering as the campaign manager. My role was to be the civic engagement manager and to really think about ways that we could engage the local community in sharing what their lived experience was and what they wanted to see change specifically about the Portland form of government and about the form of elections. And I know that we are going to get into what that process really looked like. I won't get ahead of myself, but one of the things that I really wanted to share specifically about coalition work is that a lot of the times when we think about what democracy reform is, you wouldn't necessarily think about a racial justice organization or a culturally specific organization being the leader of that work. And I think the reason that we were so successful in Portland, Oregon in passing this effort was because we were able to center the most impacted. It wasn't only about the traditional good government groups, it was about centering people of color, centering youth, centering renters, all of those communities, and really thinking about a way that we could truly engage Portlanders in that whole process.
So in New York City, I was able to build upon the base that Susan and Rank the Vote NYC created. Were any of you in the session yesterday talking about protecting the win? I said something there. There's a difference between winning and winning the right way. And so Susan did the work of winning the right way, building a coalition so that the democracy reform community did not come into New York and say, hey, you have to have ranked choice voting. We don't care what your community thinks. We're going to pass this ballot initiative. She built a coalition very early on, and we were able to build upon that in how we did the public education campaign. So we were able to reach 1.5 million New Yorkers in materials in 20 different languages. And that was because we built a coalition of 750 organizations that reached out into their communities. And not just the national partners you would think of, not just the local partners you would think of. We had Meals on Wheels delivering materials to everyone who got a meal from them in their native language. We had the public libraries, because this was during the pandemic and people weren't going into libraries. When they were doing book deliveries, they included ranked choice voting materials in everything they did. The mayor's office did a huge poll on favorite pizza topping. Just all of these ways of reaching out and doing it with organizations you wouldn't normally think of as you're pulling together your coalition, especially on the implementation side.
Can I ask just one thing?
Please do.
I've been talking about the positive, but let's be honest about the negative. It's a lot harder for somebody to attack your issue and your coalition work if they decide at the end they are not going to endorse it. If they've been at the table, it's a lot harder for them to scotch it.
So let's talk about how this work actually functions. And I think a great place to start, it was with something that Ed said during his response there, which is the idea of meeting people where they're at. I hear people say that a lot, but nobody tells me exactly what that means. And so when you're recruiting people to join your cause, recognizing everybody has different things going on in their lives, right? Different lived experiences. What is your approach to meeting people where they are and then bringing them towards the cause or partnering with them in one way or another? If you could dig in a little bit there, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the way I do it is just by showing people it's okay to be yourself. And part of meeting people where they're at is you got to sort of speak their language. So if I'm in a neighborhood doing voter registration in Roxbury, for instance, and this is an area at nighttime, sometimes as the sun went down, and where folks say you shouldn't be at nighttime, you got to make sure that you still go out there. Like, these are folks that still need to be spoken to. And in the beginning, it's not as successful. It's very slow. You got to be patient. But through consistent engagement, I think that's what you're able to break through. Because the first couple times I come around, it's like, oh, who's this voting guy? Like, what the frick is he talking about? And they're sitting there, they're smoking weed, they're doing all the different stuff, and they're hanging out on, and I'm just sitting there kicking it with them, like, hey, man, this is why it's important. Like, you see what's going on with Boston PD, like, you see Suffolk County, like, you see all this stuff, like, these injustices, like, you see the income inequality in the city of Boston, like, why is it that you feel like maybe going downtown is like, yeah, I don't want to do that, like, I'll just leave that for those people and I'll just stay in the neighborhood, right? Like, why do we have these feelings? And just understanding these nuances, I feel like understanding, like, the unique political environment is very, like, I feel it's necessary. Without kind of having, like favorites or bias, just being able to just sort of, stick your finger in the air and just sort of see which way the wind is blowing on a regular basis, because things shift. And you only do that through experience, through consistent engagement. I've worked on a lot of different political campaigns in the city of Boston. I've worked in a lot of different community organizations. The one that I'm most proudest is probably the Madison Park Development Corporation, where I was the civic engagement coordinator and built out the Roxvote Coalition. And I sort of leveraged the fact that I was working for an organization that had deep pockets and that had huge name recognition, had good relationships at the State House, at City Hall, to be intentional about, okay, I'm not just gonna partner, I'm not just gonna check off this box, and this box. No, I'm gonna reach back and open the door and let these folks in that, probably wouldn't have got looked at, or usually, they might not have the best relationship with the mayor's office because they're on the ground fighting for issues that are actual touch points, right? They're not just trying to make everybody happy, like, they're really on the ground doing the work. And these are organizations that have the street credibility and just the authenticity that if you're able to create the space where these organizations are able to come to the table in the beginning and really give them leadership opportunities and roles, like the term I called WPOs, I don't know if I was going to talk about white progressive organizations, right? All the folks who you think are obviously going to support ranked choice voting and all these progressive ideals eventually, it's like, you're going to come and support this anyways. We need to create this for the people that it's going to impact the most. And I feel like that's kind of just the vibe you got to go for. I don't know.
I'm going to add on to that really quickly. We have to be honest with ourselves. This panel is not what our democracy reform movement looks like. And far too often, we have folks in the democracy reform space have communities of color as an afterthought. We already have the proposal. We know what we want to push. Now we're going to go into your organization and tell you what we're pushing. It's not that you're going to come in and work in partnership early on and say, hey, we have an idea. Can you help us flesh this out? Can you help us figure out what it looks like? That is what has to be done in order to build coalition and in order to get our reforms passed. That's something Susan has been very intentional about, and others across the movement, but it's what we need more of, working in partnership and coalition early on, because we've seen it come to bite us in the behind way too many times when we have not done that.
So I was going to say, you have to ask and you have to listen, right? You have to go there, right? As you said, you're in the neighborhood. You have to say, can I meet you? Can I learn about your community? What are the challenges your community has? Here are some of the things that, the legacy good government groups have done that haven't worked. Why did it fail in your community? How can we help? Okay, you need stuff for a registration drive. I haven't been doing that this year, but I'm getting you stuff for a registration drive. You need some trainers for your youth? We can help with that. And then it's, here are some possible things we're thinking about, as Sean said. What do you think about this idea? Would that go into your community? Would it help with that problem? And you shut up and you listen.
I just wanted to add that the framework that you outlined is so crucial not only for the organizational partners, but also for the community and the base of those organizations. I think truly the success in Portland, Oregon was because we were able to move the community through a process, and it wasn't just that they were being presented a specific policy alternative and being asked to respond to it. The way that we structured our community engagement was through a collaborative with 10 culturally specific organizations. And one of the things that I really wanted to ensure we did was create accessible curriculum. And so one of the things that for me, as I was thinking about how do we ask people about what they want a different system to look like, I was really conscious about people not feeling like they were policy experts, right? If you ask someone, what do you think about ranked choice voting? That's a very difficult question for them to answer if that is their first time hearing about this alternative, even more so if they don't know how the current system works. And so the way that we were able to approach our public education was having a series of workshops where first we taught people about what the current system was, and we asked them at a very basic level, what is your experience with the city government? What are the barriers that you face in participating in voting? And in that way, we were really able to pull out the values of what changes they wanted to see. So it wasn't about a specific reform, it was about the values of having a more accountable government, having more efficient city services, having a more diverse city council, and from there, we were then able to think about what reforms line up with that. And in Portland, Oregon, it was proportional representation. And in the end, we were able to lead that to a successful campaign that had over 50 coalition organizations that supported the measure because we were able to bring them into the process and their community from the very start.
So this work starts early, and I think that's a really interesting part of the process to talk about. That's working with a charter revision commission, that's working with organizations. We have someone here who does it legislatively, right? And I'm interested to hear, when you're developing policy, we're talking about that in community, as an elected official, what is that process for engaging your community, for meeting them where they're at, for them meeting you where you're at?
Yeah.
What does that look like on sort of the flip side when we're talking about somebody who's in the building doing it?
Yeah, well, shout out to the All-Star team. I was like, everything I was thinking has already kind of been touched on, so that was amazing. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think for me, especially because people are so over government in a lot of ways and are apathetic to government and are also like, oh my God, not another politician, I don't want to have this conversation, that I can't be offended by that. I think that's the biggest thing is I, in being a politician and an elected official, am now part of a system that historically has disenfranchised people that look exactly like me. And I need to be aware of that when I'm going into my community and having conversations about policy and making sure that, again, I am doing what I can for the best interest of District 2, which is the district that I represent, which is the highest demographic of renters and I think the highest demographic of people of color. So they're really trusting me to make sure that I give them a voice within the government body. And I need to also be really accountable to them and ensure that I don't lose myself in kind of the political tornado that happens. A lot of times we have activists that go into these spaces and they become part of the political establishment. So it's really important for me in every conversation that I have, whether it's about, we have ranked choice voting, which is great, but again, understanding that even though we have ranked choice voting in Maine and in Portland, not everybody is familiar with ranked choice voting all of the time. Those are still very privileged conversations. So I need to dial it back and I need to have conversations in terms of how do you feel about local government right now? Do you hate it? Do you love it? And what can I do to make sure that you feel like there is somebody in there that's championing for you? And especially, what kind of voter are you? Because we have significant redlining in Portland, which disenfranchises a lot of people who can't even get to the polls. And it's not as bad in Portland, Maine as it is in other cities and other states. But we do have this level of voter suppression that exists. We have a large immigrant community as well. So getting access to information is tough. So we also need to look at that. How are people processing information? How are they having access to information? Is everything in English? Are we taking into consideration neurodivergent learning styles? Am I making sure that I'm doing whatever I can to reach every single demographic, especially the most disenfranchised? And I take that very seriously as somebody that is a younger person, a Black woman, and an activist in this elected body. It's a huge privilege to have the microphone in that space. And so what I need to do is, again, make sure that I am continuing to meet people where they are, not being offended if they are an apathetic voter or if they're totally over local government, and really try to work with them to say, what can I do to bring you back? What can I do to get you to a meeting? What do I need to do to get you to show up and make your voice heard? Because your voice is important regardless of what you've been told and regardless of how you've been treated historically. So I think it's really important for me and something that I keep in the back of my mind as an elected official.
Absolutely. Whew. All right. So one thing that I'm hearing a theme of is this idea of building this and building power within it, but it's how we build relationships. And I want to hear you all talk about this a little bit. I have seen campaign coalitions come together where we get your endorsement, we have you come to that monthly meeting, we use your membership list, and we do that, and then we win, and then we never talk again. I would call that a transactional relationship. And I want to hear, we'll start with Susan, or whoever wants to jump in first, but I can see Susan's reaction, so I need it. But how do you talk about the investment in relationships? We know that working alone, we can work fast. Coalitions are slow, coalitions are hard, but coalitions are what you really build with. And I want to hear how you approach relationships when you're asking somebody to work with you or you are offering to work with them.
Well, it's what I said before. It's by asking questions and being willing to listen to the answers and come up with mutually workable solutions. And also, it's honoring the work that's being done by your coalition partners and being sure that they get the recognition for it.
So we have a habit of believing that our reforms are the most pressing issue, that our issue is the most pressing issue in everybody's life. Here in California, half of Californians are one paycheck away from living in poverty. So for us to go into a community, into an organization and say, hey, we have this new voting system and you should care about it so much that you should drop everything and join us and knock on doors and talk to, that's not the reality. It goes to meeting people where they are. If you're worried about how you're gonna put food on the table, if you're worried about having a house or a roof over your head, then this is not going to be your main issue. You have to find ways to work with people where they are and to accommodate them as best we can. That is, I think, probably the most important part of building a coalition, is working with people on where they are, and not just on our issue. It also has to be not just transactional in one way. We have to work with them on their issues as well.
Yeah, I really want to build off of that last point that you shared about really being able to show up for other folks in the community as well. Again, this is not the most important reform, and I think a lot of the times when there is that sense of urgency, you really are just reproducing white supremacy in a different way. And so you really have to acknowledge that each community has different issues that they are experiencing. And so one of the ways that you're able to alleviate that burden is being able to provide as much technical assistance as is possible. I'm just thinking about myself when I, came into this work literally 2 years ago. I didn't know what ranked choice voting was. I had never heard about proportional representation. And so I really needed another organization, other mentors to really guide me in gaining that knowledge so that I had been equipped with that tool. And so rather than just presenting, again, this policy proposal to another organization, it's about investing in their knowledge and making sure that they really do understand it, because the truth is that once they do understand it, they're able to make those connections for themselves. As I did endorsement presentations with other organizations, I didn't even have to be the one to say, this is a great solution for any constituency, because it's about making a truer and more reflective democracy. And what it takes is being able to provide that knowledge in a way that is not rushed, in a way that is not urgent, without having a demanding timeline that says, we need your endorsement by this date. That's not the way that you offer leadership opportunities or education to other organizations. And so I think the timeline component is something that, as a campaign, as an effort, you have to be extremely conscious about being able to provide sufficient time for those staff members to, one, learn about it, and then take it back to their community too. Because endorsement processes should be people-centered, and those organizations need to go back to their community and see what they think about it. It's not only about that organization. And so, again, it's about not falling into that pitfall of urgency.
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said. I also think it's interesting with the ranked choice voting conversation specifically, because by design, I actually think a lot of Black people and people of color haven't been able to access that information because we're not the ones leading this work, because we've never been empowered enough to be the ones leading this conversation. So oftentimes when I bring up ranked choice voting, it is a new conversation just based on the fact that that type of information hasn't really made its way to communities of color in the same way that I think it has been kind of a white-centered and white-dominated conversation. So I really look forward to the times where, we can have panels like this that are extremely diverse panels talking about ranked choice voting, because we have a lot of stuff to say. And I think it is only going to empower more individuals that have our life experience, that look like us, that are going to start trusting what we're talking about as well, and say, well, tell me more about this governmental system. And also be aware that, again, we have to meet people where they are. And like you had mentioned, if people are worried about affording their groceries or putting food on the table, and we're like, but ranked choice voting, I think that that is not the right way that we're going to have that conversation. So I agree that, we need an immense amount of patience. And I also think, too, we are in an instant gratification type of world. So anything that we want, we can get from our phone immediately. And I think we think of that with coalition building as well. And we forget that it takes significant time. It's going to take sometimes months or even years to really build a strong coalition. And you have to be patient and you have to be in it for the long game, because the instant gratification in terms of quick information sharing via social media is great. We all love that. But in terms of really building a strong community and a coalition and investing in these authentic relationships and not just having these transactional, hey, do this thing for me type of relationships, it's going to take time. It's going to take you going into communities that don't look like you and just getting to know individuals and getting to know what their passions are and figuring out ways that we can build a stronger community together. So the access to immediate information and the need for immediate gratification is actually going to negatively impact your coalition work. And I really encourage a ton of patience, a ton of time. If your coalition is not coalitioning after 3 weeks, that's very normal. I think it's gonna take some time to build and to work, and once it does, and you really put that time in the work, it's a beautiful thing when coalition and organizing actually works very well, and it can if you give it the time and the patience that it deserves.
That was great. I completely agree. What can you say? But I'll just say a bit of a pivot. I think that when you're being intentional and methodical and patient with this coalition building work, you kind of find yourself in a case manager, wraparound services kind of role, where you're, it's you're invested in these relationships and you're building trust, and you know, you're being patient. Like you understand that this is going to take time, and that's what the whole capacity building process is. And you know, like you said, once you see that finally come to fruition, like that's why I went like this, because I've been there. When you see it finally all come together, and you're just like, oh my God, like, whew, yeah. Oh, one last thing too. We also need to have like leaders of these major organizations who are willing to be bold enough to take a risk on an organizer of color and giving them that shot, giving them that leadership role, right? I'll say specifically, thank you, Nathan Lockwood, right? He probably doesn't appreciate this right now, but he definitely deserves it, right? You know, I think that, you know, somebody like me who, you know, isn't really like a cookie cutter kind of person who usually gets these types of roles, but is somebody who is respected in the organizing community in Boston, who's done a lot of work and is really passionate about democracy, about underrepresented communities, having a seat at the table. Like we need folks who are willing to take those gambles and give folks a shot, and that's another thing.
So I will build upon everything that's been said. A way to give a coalition a shot in the arm is with resources. Remember, organizations that you're working with are already resource strapped. And so if you're coming in and saying, hey, I need you to do this additional thing, I need you to talk to your community about this additional issue, you need to be able to bring the resources to the table to allow them to do that as painlessly as possible.
So one thing we always talk about on campaigns, I feel like everybody at some point is like, we're building the plane as we fly it, right? It's all this, we're finding these pieces as we go, we're doing all of this. And as people who have done coalition work, how do you assess what an organization has to offer this space? Is it you know, something that they're already doing? Is it something that you think they have the potential to do? You know, when we're in this coalition, if we've decided, hey, we're pushing this reform, we're doing this thing, you need somebody to be knocking doors. You need somebody to do the digital work. How do you, in this group, engage folks, have them step up, and how do you figure out what roles you need people in? Anyone, go ahead.
All right. No, I mean, that's a wonderful question. I think I'll give it to Susan first, though. No?
No,
You
come
sure?
on, finish yours.
All right.
Don't do that to me.
What could I say about that? I mean, I think that you just have to be very creative in creating opportunities, like in just focusing on organizations' strengths where they already lay. I remember when I was building the Roxville Coalition, or rebuilding the Roxville Coalition, I won't take credit for the initial start of it, but there were some organizations that didn't have a full-time civic engagement coordinator. They just had an employee who, particular employee who loved civic engagement, who thought it was important, who wanted to somehow connect with this broader movement, even though sometimes it may have fell outside of their role, it may have sometimes even fell outside of like their organizational mission, but it was something that they really felt strongly about. And just realizing that and sort of creating the opportunities for them to get the credit for being a part of the movement. Like, you got to give people credit. A lot of the times the stuff that I was doing, I was running around like crazy, putting together candidates forums, cookout with the candidates, leading canvases, phone banks, and a lot of the times I would give the credit away to a coalition partner. And over time, these folks would then start actually doing things where they actually deserve the credit. You know, so it's sometimes you have to bring people along and realize that, like, hey, you know, like, they might not be able to do everything right away. Some people just bring a big name, you know, that then allow you to bring the other organization that's actually going to do a lot of work for you, right? So it's just, I don't know, you have to like strategize. I don't know, it's hard. I mean, it's easy to say, but you have to really just be creative. That's really the best way I could say it. Just be nimble and creative and, yeah, open to new things.
So I think part of being strategic is really thinking through what your needs are who you need to reach and who is best equipped to reach those communities. So in New York City, when we were saying we need to reach seniors, senior centers are closed, everyone's still in lockdown, where are seniors getting services from? We knew it was Meals on Wheels. We knew it was the libraries. We knew it was health centers. And so we provided each of those groups with the materials they needed. We literally printed them. Grace was there. She saw an office filled with 1 million pieces of paper, literally 1 million pieces of paper. And we got those distributed to all those partners for them to distribute. And so really thinking strategically, if we needed an organization that was able to talk to black voters in Brooklyn, we knew that it was going to be the Brooklyn NAACP. And we provided them with the money, to hire organizers that could go door to door and talk to black voters in Brooklyn, and hand out literature that, again, we printed for them, with their branding on it, right? Because it doesn't have to be us getting the credit. I think oftentimes we say, oh, it's me. It has to be, Sean did this.
Give
Sean's
up the
name
spotlight.
has to put on it. Right, exactly.
Give up the spotlight.
Absolutely. So we put their logo on it and made sure that they got the credit, right, in that work. And
again, I'm going to say the same thing. I ask and I listen, right? So I know that we actually, it's bizarre, we had city council primaries in 2023 because of redistricting, and there were some really hotly contested races in the Chinese community. And so I sat down with our partners in the Chinese community and I said, here are the things that are going on. Here are the kind of things that we hope could be done. We have some support. What works for you? What are you able to do? And my strongest partner said, oh, you're really timely because we are just putting together our plan. And if I know I have additional resources, I can do X, Y, and Z, and we can commit to the following. And we went back and forth, frankly, on a 2-page memorandum of understanding where we just said, okay, what can you do? Yeah, we can commit to X number of presentations. We can commit to this. We can commit to carrying the lit in our canvassers that'll reach, we expect X number of households. And we're just very open about, what was possible. And they said, yeah, I can do that, but that's not our program. We're not going to be able to do that aspect of it. But why don't you talk to our colleagues over there, whom I also knew, and see if they'll pick up that part of it. So it's being collaborative. It's finding out, can you do this? We all know what a campaign is. We all know what pieces the campaign needs. And it's really a question of, do you have the capability? And if we can provide you with some resources, can you pick it up?
Let's have Sol, and then we'll have Victoria.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing about really building trust with the community. I think a lot of the time when we're talking about the most impacted communities, they're the communities that don't have a lot of trust in local government and don't have a lot of trust that elections can deliver the outcomes that they need for their community. And so you really do have to strategize who is the most trusted messenger that can reach that community. Who are the community leaders that already have relationships within the community so that you are not duplicating that work. And I think really being able to identify what are existing services, existing programs that organizations already have, that as a campaign you can come in and offer financial support, offer technical support, and really help to make that effort even bigger. One of the examples that I can think about is within the Portland context, we knew that we needed field organizers to go knocking on doors and talking about the effort. One of our partner organizations, Next Up Action Fund, which is a youth-led BIPOC organization, they already had an existing program that we were able to say, hey, if we are able to help fund this so that you can hire even more youth organizers, would that be beneficial for you if you can talk about what you already have on your election agenda and also talk about this effort? And that ended up being a really successful way that we were able to take that existing effort, not completely come up with something new, but just add additional resources.
Yeah, I love the talks about like strategic with voting and things like that and being strategic. I I did that, or I tried to, in terms of canvassing, because I hated canvassing. It was a nightmarish experience, actually. And my district's really interesting, where it has a, highest demographic of people of color, but also an area that is very white and very old money. And I equipped one of my good friends, a white man. He wore his best Patagonia sweater, and he went door to door, and they were loving him. And he just talked about me. He got invited in for tea. It was actually really great. So I love thinking about strategic ways to engage, because that actually really helped me a lot. But I think I love the strategic conversation, and I also think the other thing that's really important to be is equitable with these conversations, because a lot of times the organizations that are already doing this great work, it's fantastic, but I also want to find the organizations that have great potential. I want to find the organizations that don't really have opportunities to flex and to thrive. And I want to pull up those organizations, and I want to highlight those, because potential is such a beautiful thing. And I want to make sure, again, that the organizations that don't often get the platforms, which historically are often organizations that are led by people of color, have the opportunity to be part of this movement and have the opportunity to actually lead the movement, because they are oftentimes the most impacted group. And so I want to make sure that I'm centering their experiences. Maybe they're not leading the charge and getting all of all of this fame, but I want to make sure that they have their chance at the table. And I also think the last thing I'll leave you with on this is just the fact that it's totally okay to go back and regroup your coalition. That happens very often, where maybe it's not working and you need to pivot a little bit. Maybe you need to go back to the drawing board. That's okay. It doesn't need to be an A+ coalition right out the gate. You can always go back, you can always restructure, and you can figure out what's working and what's not. I think that actually happens throughout your work in coalitions, is you're always moving, you're always pivoting, and you have to be quick in terms of thinking, what's working, how do I restructure, what's not working, and how can I also make sure, again, that I'm providing opportunity to those that often don't have that opportunity to shine.
A word, yes. I have one last question before I'm going to open it up for a couple from the audience. Several of you are local organizers. Several of you are national organizers. How can national organizations help local coalitions? How can that work be balanced between the local and the national? What should we be careful with? And what are the must-dos and what are the don't-dos?
Don't helicopter into my backyard. So let me just tell you that right now. Don't surprise me that you're coming into New York, that because this is, going to happen. And seriously, that's the biggest problem, is the helicopter aspect of it.
And period, or?
No, I mean, that's a big part of it, especially in Boston. Like, after I graduated political science, I moved to Boston, and it took me a long time for folks to actually listen to anything I said or even take me seriously, because Boston, it's like if you're not from there, that's just kind of how it is. So it took a lot of intentional work, consistent work, building trust, keeping my word, providing opportunities for folks, just showing folks the consistent integrity and positive intention in my work over time, cycle over cycle, right? Election cycle over election cycle. You keep seeing this person doing the same good work and creating more relationships. I feel like, that's probably one of the major ones.
No, go ahead. I think I have a unique lens because I work for a national organization. I work for RepresentWomen. Thanks. Yeah. I hope you see our booth, and also our happy hour starts at 6. I hope to see all of you there. But I am a local politician working for a national organization. And so I think that that's really great because I get to have a unique insight on how we can make sure that, we are doing this national work, and we have a bunch of incredible partners, many of whom are in the room. And I think that that piece is so important, but also not forgetting the local organizations that are doing really great work and figuring out how we can make sure that we're engaging, especially around ranked choice voting and ranked choice voting initiatives. How do we make sure that we are supporting our partners, Fair Vote and Rank the Vote, and also supporting the local organizers that are on the ground, which these two organizations are working directly with? How can we be good partners in that way? To make sure that we can push that conversation around ranked choice voting and how it relates to women and how it relates to women's representation. So, yeah, I agree. I think it's being patient with how we're needed, and it's also hearing feedback of how we can be most effective and understanding that as a national organization, we do have an immense amount of privilege within that, and it's really important, again, that we are listening to our partners, that we are listening to the people who are on the ground, who are doing the grassroots work, and figuring out ways that we as a national organization can uplift their message and continue to amplify it.
But I do want to say, and I do want to give amazing credit to the national partners who helped us in New York, that we would not have been able to do the work that we did. 700 plus organizations, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of presentations, without the support of the national groups who trusted us to understand our backyard and to let us set the strategy, but helped us with the resources and brought us information and learning that we did not have as a first-time RCV group. And that, to me, was a really, really productive partnership. We were very conscious in New York that if we fell on our face, it was going to be really bad for RCV across the country, and that we needed to get it right. And I'm really grateful that we had strong national partners who helped us do that.
Yeah, one of the things that I would really emphasize is that a lot of the times organizations that traditionally have not been engaged in democracy reform, one of the reasons they haven't been is not because they don't care. It is absolutely not that. It's because even applying for resources, even going through those initial processes can be very time-consuming, can be very complex at a time when they are already under capacity and already understaffed. And so I would really, to the funders in the room, say, think about how you are making those processes more accessible so that those community groups that are BIPOC-led, that don't traditionally engage in this work, do have an opportunity to get access from those resources. I would also say that believing in young people is definitely one of the best things that you can do. We are the next generation that is going to keep fueling this movement. And I think that I personally am a great example, again, going from not knowing anything about proportional representation to being trusted and mentored through a process in which I was the campaign manager of a historic reform. I think we need more of that.
So one thing I will say is, how do I put this? I'm just going to say it. Don't shove RCV down people's throats. If you go into a community and there is not a desire for ranked choice voting, accept that there is not a desire for ranked choice voting in that community. Far too often, and I live in a place where we're seeing the impact of that, communities are not asked if they want ranked choice voting. They're told that they're going to have ranked choice voting. I opened up saying there's a difference between winning and winning the right way. I live in Oakland, California, a place where we won, but we did not win the right way. And nearly 20 years later, we are seeing the repercussions of that because there are voters who genuinely feel disenfranchised. There are communities who are upset because they have not had their voice heard, or they feel they have not had their voice heard in the process. And so it's very important that we win the right way.
So we have time for one or two questions, and I'm seeing Paula right here coming up. So yeah, we have time for two, and I'm going to walk over and not make it awkward.
Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. But one word I heard over and over, I have a lot of questions, but this one I have to ask. You mentioned resources, all of you. Where did you get them?
So I will say resources are not just money. Resources are expertise. Resources are printed materials. Yes, we got money. We had money in New York, thankfully, from a number of sources, mostly local sources or state level. But it was a coalition of folks, really, quite honestly, of funders. It wasn't a single source that provided those resources. But again, I re-emphasize, we didn't give Meals on Wheels money. We didn't give the libraries money. We gave them the printed materials for them to be able to distribute it to their communities.
And the training.
Yes, and the training on how to talk about it. Absolutely.
Can you talk a little, I heard someone say, and the training. What do you mean?
Well, in any campaign, whether it's something you're trying to pass or something you're trying to implement, the most important thing is to have a clear and uniform message. So we developed training materials. I mean, we did hundreds and hundreds of candidate trainings and online trainings and in-person voter education trainings. So we had a 5-minute presentation on ranked choice voting. We had a 10-minute presentation, and we had an hour-long presentation. We made all of those slides available to all of our partners. And at the end of every presentation, we told people where to find our slides on our website. Everything we created, you didn't have to come to us. You could download it at 3 o'clock in the morning if you needed the Vietnamese version for whatever reason. And we said to our partners, how can we help you educate your community? And so, we heard back from them. We have these kinds of functions. We need this kind of material. And we checked all the translations with our community partners. Wild fight about how to, one word in Bengali. I don't know what they were fighting about. And I couldn't decide it. They had to duke it out and decide what word was going to be on the Bengali version. They were yelling at each other on the phone. And they figured it out. And just, so training, because it's not intuitive.
Make it
I don't know what's going on.
Leave it on. Leave it hot.
Don't leave it hot. We can hear you. All right, last question, and we'll see what the other room's going to say at the same time. Yep, we have one over here.
Okay. I feel like I ask this question all the time, and I get different answers. But as somebody who is very aware that, our group in particular, and we are very aware that we do not look like a lot of times community, especially in Chicago, that we are not representative of the entire community. We want to connect with people who are in other parts of the city, who are involved in other work. We don't know how to do that. Because sometimes just like cold calling somebody, doesn't always get you anywhere. So we have I think that's a really big problem for us, is we don't know where to start.
I can speak a little bit to this. I think one of the first things that you can do as you're trying to build those relationships, it's not to do that presentation, right, where you're saying, hey, we're working on this, do you want to be a part of it? I think that will organically come up as you are developing that relationship. So just starting by looking at specific organizations that are targeting the community groups you need to get on your side, you need to educate, and going to events that they're hosting, really immersing yourself in their community so that they do start to recognize that you are right, that you're in that space, that you're also a part of that community. I think it has to come from that authentic place where you're not necessarily going into it with that specific goal, because you don't know if they'll be interested. You don't know if this will resonate with their community, but just being a face that is showing up to their events, that is supporting, going to fundraisers, going to those types of events is one of the first things that you can do to really start to build that relationship.
Just how many of you all table at farmers markets? Raise your hand. Guess what? Sad reality is you're not going to get people of color at a farmer's market. You're going to get the people that you get, the people that you've always been getting, by going to farmers markets. You need to know where people are and how to reach them. The reality is most communities of color are food deserts. There aren't farmers markets in black neighborhoods in most cities. Well, New York, yes, you all have like a whole public market thing, yes. I know, because they were one of our partners. But you have to go where people are and know where people are in order to reach them.
I was going to say also, like, I agree with everything that was said here. People vote at the ballot box, but people also vote with their feet, right? So you have to be in community, like in community. Like these events, that these organizations that are working with the populations you're trying to target, definitely be at those, but also be at the coffee shops in that neighborhood. Also, shop at the local business, because what you'll often find is that there are flyers for a lot of local events and different things happening in the community that you're not going to be aware about just scrolling through Facebook, right? Or social media, different hashtags. Like you have to physically show up, like consistently over time and spend a significant amount of time there. So, yeah.
Hello? Oh, okay. I also just think in terms of diversifying your life, it's just a lifelong thing that everybody should just do. So not just because of work, or not just because you feel like, hey, I think we probably need some partners of color, or hey, like, it's Juneteenth, we should probably do something, or like, hey, it's February, we should probably, I just think diversify your life in general. So just start shopping at Black-owned businesses because they're great businesses, and that's where you should be shopping. Start shopping at Asian-owned businesses because that's where you should be shopping. And if you start to really just diversify your life on a regular basis, just as a human, a lot of these relationships that you're looking to build will naturally just start existing, because you'll just start existing as a human that wants to connect with other humans, but are also changing your lens to where you're saying, well, wow, like my community around me looks a lot like me. Maybe I should just start to branch out and meet some new people. And then I think with that, the opportunities you're looking for of engaging authentically with communities that don't look like you will start to present themselves. But I just encourage you as a human to just start diversifying your life, because it's great, and we have a wonderful melting pot of different races, ethnicities, and cultures that we should all be immersing ourselves in regularly.
And I would say, along those lines, be curious, be open. Right? I mean, that's why I say it's so emotionally satisfying. It just is. To make those connections, to learn about different communities, to be present on their issues, and to take that back to your community, it's a very fulfilling thing.
So with that we are out of time with this amazing all-star team. I want a big round of applause for them.
And for our host of our facilitator, Grace.
And now to happy hour. We'll see you all there.
Love people.